Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Emergency Podcast. I'm Nigel Goodwin.
I'm Ian Bailey.
Awesome. And look, we're back. It's only been 2 days. It's only two days ago as we're recording this.
2 days, 2 days is an eternity in today's politics.
There are so many things that we could touch on just from the last 2 days. We will definitely not get to all of them, but we do have a plan for what we would like to talk about today. And it probably starts with one of those many polls. You know, we talked about a poll the other day, Keir Starmer's lack of popularity, and there's a new one. There's a new one that hit last night, isn't there, Ian?
Yeah, I woke up to it. I woke up to it this morning, and glanced at it, giggled slightly, and thought, "Oh boy, oh boy!" So this is today's YouGov, Sky News, and the Times poll, which came out this morning, which puts the Tories in fourth place, behind Reform, Labour, and now the LibDems. So we're ahead of the Tories. Woo! Party flag. So Reform are on 29%, Labour 22%, Lib Dems 17%, Conservatives 16%, the Greens on 10%. So we've had crossover, right, between... We already had crossover between Reform and the Tories, and then Reform overtook Labour. We've now had crossover between the Lib Dems and the Tories, and you start looking at the direction of travel on that, and it's like, well, there's only 5 points now between Labour and the Lib Dems, and there's only 6 points between the Tories and the Greens.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, just before we dive into probably the main topic, the other thing that's interesting about that is, I mean, I think I messaged you back when you sent it to me that it's like this is hung Parliament territory all the way, and it's because nobody's above 30%, right? I mean, we thought that, and look, it is possible to win a glorious majority with a very small percentage, as we saw not 10 months ago, but yeah, it's nobody is popular, I think, is what we can say here. Nobody is running away with it popular. There is a direction of travel. You are completely right, but to me, it tells us that there are ways to fix this because nobody has got even a third of the electorate behind them right now.
Well, if you add those numbers together, in the last show, we were talking about how Labour and the Conservatives have been kind of glued together in the minds of quite a lot of voters.
Yeah.
LabCon is 38% on this poll.
Yeah.
Between them.
Which
Back
is insane.
in the day, you needed to be north of 40% to be guaranteed to get a majority, and now you've got both of them together on less than 40.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you would. You know, I've not done the research on this, but you would probably. It probably has never happened in history, not since Labour became an actual meaningful force in the early to mid 1900s. That kind of a thing.
Well, the other interesting thing is the last time that the Tories were in fourth. Do you know when that was?
Just in a poll, just in a general poll. No.
It's not actually that far back. It's only the beginning of 2019. And that was
Brexit craziness, end of Theresa May.
Towards the end of Theresa May. And of course, later that year, Boris Johnson, the new leader, went on and won a majority of 80. So it's early to write things off and to say this is guaranteed to happen, because I think surely all we've had proven repeatedly now is that the impossible is now possible in today's politics. It's just the things that haven't happened yet are what we call impossible. But on this one, it feels like there isn't a burning platform like the Brexit, which was trying to get done. Well, there is a burning platform, but let's just park that for a second. But there isn't an immediate burning platform, and there isn't likely to be a general election for another 4 years. So the idea that, the Tories can actually turn the thing around that quickly just strikes me as hopium.
Yeah.
It's not even optimism now. It's, I believe in fairies, politically.
Yeah. And there's, there is a third thing there as well, which which we haven't considered, which is around, we talked about it the other day about the strength of the bench and all that kind of stuff. They had Boris, right? And look, whatever my opinions about Boris Johnson, hell of a campaigner, incredibly charismatic, and very popular for a time, right? So they do not have that right now. Not to say they might not go back. I mean, they could, but they don't have him right now.
Well, you mentioned Boris Johnson, and I think we have to touch on just like use that as a nice pivot into the other bit of breaking news that we've had since the last show, all of 2 days ago, which of course is Starmer's UK EU deal, which got announced, and that, I mean, it's not a deal; it's the heads of agreement towards a deal, but we kind of know the direction of travel that they're going. But largely, it's been taken as a positive by other parties, with a couple of exceptions, which are fairly obvious. Reform and the Tories hate the thing. Largely positive by industry, by various sort of groups, etc. Not taken positively by the aforementioned Boris Johnson, who, and I loved this, branded Keir Starmer as, quote, the orange ball chewing gimp of Brussels, unquote.
Wow. I hadn't actually read that. I knew he'd gone mad about it, but I had not heard the exact. I mean, he has a way with words. Let's just put it that way.
We could put lots of horrendous Boris Johnson quotes on out there to show his way with words. But the interesting bit was that Tim Montgomery, who's your ex-Tory spin doctor, and now I think he actually might have gone over towards reform. But Tim Montgomery has said he's hearing from lots of friends in the Tory party that there is now serious agitation to try and bring Boris Johnson back.
Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me. I mean, every time they have even, a slightly bad day, the talk of bring Boris back comes up. So I mean, and they're not having slightly bad days right now. It's catastrophic.
I was going to say they're not having slightly bad days now and then. They're having catastrophic, as you said, days practically
every day.
Sorry, you were saying in the run up to this, you wanted to briefly talk about their reaction to the EU deal as well, just as an illustration of that.
Yeah, and I think this is honestly, I got little shivers down, on the hairs on the back of my neck. The moment both the Tories and Farage came out of the woodwork to start talking about this deal, because it was like I've been transported back, 5, 6, 7 years.
Yep.
It is so backwards, effectively, to go there. It's like every aspect of what Keir Starmer is trying to do here with regards to the government. Again, this is not me playing the party political side and everything else and being tribal. He said he wanted to have grown-up conversations about things. That's all he's doing. He's trying to do deals. He's trying to fix things. This planned deal does not replace the money lost through Brexit, but it helps a little bit. It's chipping away, right? And to hear people using the type of language like, treason and selling out to Europe. It was just like what we were hearing in 2018, 2019 and all that kind of stuff. And it's just, this does not help the Tories right now.
Well, it doesn't. And lots of people have been pointing at the screaming hypocrisy of it. So the fishing thing's probably the most controversial element of the deal. Because what's been agreed as part of a broader deal, which allows the fishermen, of which there's an awful lot up here in the northeast of Scotland, to be able to sell the products that they catch into the EU market much easier. As part of that deal, they have extended the fishing waters access rights of the EU into UK waters, and of course vice versa, because originally it was timed so that there had to be a review, as I understand it, next year under the Boris deal. The Tories have gone on like some kind of massive betrayal. It's like, but it's literally maintaining your status quo on your deal.
That is the most important thing. It's extending the access negotiated by Boris Johnson. That's the whole point. And again, we know that this stuff gets lost in the noise, that it's all about he who shouts the loudest and everything else. But I don't think Kemi Badenoch is in a position where shouting about the evils of the EU and saying that she's going to tear down, tear up any agreement on day one that she becomes Prime Minister, which, by the way, she's not going to become Prime Minister. It's not grown-up politics. It's not thinking about how do we... to use a Trumpism, how do we make Britain great again? It's like we don't do it by just tearing up pieces of paper and agreements and annoying every single one of our neighbours. But yeah,
which is what they did. I think actually we really should be fair, because on the last episode we talked about the Labour problem and can Keir Starmer turn things around. I think we've got to do the Tory problem today. I don't think it'll take very long, because the question is, can Kemi Badenoch turn things around for the Tories? And once I stop laughing, I think the answer is no. No, she can't. And what's more, the Tories know that she can't, which is why they're talking about getting Boris Johnson back in.
Yeah. No, exactly. And you know, I wrote down, you know, when you sent over a proposed agenda, I wrote down the Tory problem, and I've only written one line, because for me, it's the only thing that matters in terms of the Tory problem. And you know, I think you'll agree with this, but you know, shout out if you don't. The Tory problem is they're not the Tories anymore.
Absolutely.
That's it. It's like, and we don't need to do a full history lesson, but the reality is that Boris Johnson kicked out, we talk about strength of the bench and everything else, there was a lot of pretty decent parliamentarians in the Tory party in 2019, and Boris Johnson kicked a whole load of them out because they were, in this case, Remainers, but they were also, what they really stood for is they were true Conservatives. They were, you know, One Nation Tories. They appealed to the part of the electorate that votes Tory every single time, and he replaced them with effectively UKIPers. That's what he replaced them with. And there is now a Conservative Party with very limited experience and people who, in most cases, do not reflect what the Conservatives have traditionally been.
And I think that you're right. This is the heart of the Tory problem, which is you've got a Conservative and Unionist party, which is neither Conservative nor Unionist. That's it in a nutshell.
Just one very quick, and I don't know what I spent it, but one quick point on this. There was, and it reminded me when I started thinking about this earlier today. It reminded me of it was Ian Paisley Jr., DUP, 2 or 3 years ago, back when Boris was still PM, and the DUP are long-term allies of the Conservatives, right? They would never get into bed with Labour, right? They hate Labour. And he described the Conservatives in an interview as the English Nationalist Party. That is a senior member of the DUP. That was in 2022, and he's not wrong.
No.
To a certain extent, he's not wrong, because that's what that party has become. But yeah, that's the problem.
I think I don't think this is, to be fair to Kemi Badenoch, I don't think this is about her leadership, although it is really, really, really bad. I did very briefly look at the press conference that she did yesterday in response to the EU deal, and as other journalists reported, it was practically being held in a cupboard, right, with a few friendly faces shoved in the back. But somebody who still supports the Tories on a forum elsewhere today was talking about the fact that, look, you know, the Tories are going to absolutely wipe the floor with reform because all the fundamentals are still in place. And it's like, well, no, they're not. But then also, can you imagine what a debate is going to be like between Kemi and Farage when you get towards an election? She's brittle, she's narrow-minded, and she's prone to start just shouting when stuff's being said that she disagrees with and talking in slogans. He's just going to absolutely demolish her. And but I think he'd demolish any other obvious Tory leader. And Robert Jenrick is worse, right? He's even worse than she is. Who are they going to put in place? And do any of these people actually believe in conservatism or unionism?
Exactly, and that is the fundamental problem. You know, Boris Johnson might be seen as their great saviour by a number of people still in the Conservative Party, but he is actually the man who has engineered this demise. Because if they still had a whole host of those, I'm trying to think of some of those, Dominic Grieve and Rory Stewart and all. I mean, Rory Stewart has pretty much moved on from the Tories these days, but again, if they had some of those types of characters still left in the party, they would at least have some experience and some, I don't know, pragmatists who could come in and try to turn the tide. I'm not saying they could succeed in the near term, but like anything else, I would never write the Tories off ever, because I've made that mistake before. And they do have they do have the fundamentals in place. That is true. They have a base. They're the oldest, I think, they're the oldest political party still in existence, right? They can trace their time back. But it doesn't mean that they have a right to exist.
Okay, look, in today's politics, everything's possible. So the Tories could win the election, right? Yeah. They could. Labour implodes, Reform are bankrupted, and believe me, there's stuff ongoing that might actually do horrible things to Reform as a party. The Tories replace Kemi with, or actually probably replace Jenrick with somebody who's slightly more sensible. He starts off from a place of, look, we've actually got to start off with who are we and what do we believe in. I could write, a conservative who we are and our mission statement bit just because I'm a student of politics. I could do it for every party. You have to understand what all of the different dynamics are. It's the fact that the Tories don't want to do it because I think their remaining members and their remaining voters are so set in their ways that you can't go out there and actually do the basics. Go back to, let's be honest, Thatcherism, the 80s, very controversial and very painful still for a whole lot of people. But there was a vibe about the country politically through a decent spell of it. And if they could rehook onto some of the fundamentals of that, then they can have a go. Because what's the thing that people fundamentally want at the moment? And it's change. And we touched on the change word in the last episode. And we need to move on to it now. Because the Tories, with this EU response thing that they've done, all they're trying to do is talk about the past, but not we're going to go back to the past. They're just trying to fight the old battles of the past, which supposedly they won. But there's nothing new. And you can't just go back to, we're going to wind the clock back because Labour are terrible and we're going to go back to being economically competent. You're not economically competent. You're an absolute bunch of muppets who bankrupted the country. And that's what people are fed up with. That's why no one's listening to them. Yeah. I'm a Lib Dem, and the party really struggles for traction, which is why you then saw Ed Davey doing bungee jumping and things in the last election campaign, brilliantly to be able to attract attention. Kemi is the new Ed Davey before the election in terms of nobody will give her the time of day, right? Yeah. And no one's interested in what she's got to say because it's just the past, and it's so disconnected from political opinion and political relevancy that you might as well not bother. And that's the risk. If this poll, if that trend really does carry on sliding and this embeds itself, because it's only one poll, but you've got to start thinking about the trend. If this really embeds itself, then they truly are in deep trouble.
Yeah, they're both. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's it's shades of the Liberal Party. When Labour appeared, right? When Labour appeared on the scene, the Liberal Party over a generation or two effectively disappeared. From being, one of the two major parties, it effectively disappeared, and it's again for entirely different reasons, but it can happen. It can happen to major political forces.
But also the people people not listening bit. And some of my colleagues will hate this. My analogy actually was that Kemi Badenoch is David Owen, but David Owen circa 1989, right? So the SDP and the Liberal Party had merged together to form the Liberal Democrats, but you still were left with a rump Liberal and a rump SDP. And Owen basically didn't want to give it up and was still protesting that he was still the leader of the Social Democratic Party and we're still serious and we're still here. And it's like everyone's like, we don't care. We don't care whether you're here or not. Right? No. The world has moved on. And that feels a bit like Kemi and the Tories at the moment.
I do agree. And I think just to kind of close the loop on the Tories, when you think about how do they fix it, the obvious thing is to replace Kemi Badenoch, but the problem, the problem is who. But also, you've just touched on it there with the fact that they can't get traction. They can't get any attention in the media. They are so irrelevant right now. That's what's happened. They've gone from being in power to being irrelevant in 12 months, that the media will barely touch it. You know, when you think back to 2019, when all those, you know, when they were electing a new leader, and they had all those televised debates with, you know, with like 5 or 6 candidates, including Boris, and they were all tearing strips off each other. They won't do that. They won't even bother, because they're currently the fourth most popular party in the country. Why bother? They're not doing it for the Greens right now. The Greens are electing a new leader. There's no major news coverage of that right now. So why?
And that's kind of the point. So I mean, you know, to go back to the question about the Tory problem, can Kemi save them? No. Can another leader save them? I think, and this sounds awful, but Boris might actually be the one way that they can get some attention.
Yeah, because
right?
he's TV gold, right? That's what it comes down to. He's ratings gold, like Farage.
So, I mean, because otherwise you're into, like, you know, think about the potential other Tories that are around. You've got a load of no names, like literal who are you people. But then you've got a couple of people that people have at least heard of, like, you know, Jenrick they've heard of, but Jenrick was the guy who was painting over Mickey Mouse at the asylum centre, right? Not a great look, and it still hung around his neck. And then, of course, you've got James Cleverly, who, as someone who used to live on Teesside in Stockton-on-Tees, became famous in his own backyard for sitting there at Prime Minister's questions and responding to a question about why is Stockton-on-Tees not getting any money, and his response from a sedentary position on the government front bench was, because it's a shithole. And he's known for gaffes, right? Yeah. Boris does gaffes, but everyone accepts them as part of the brief. So there is this, oh God, what if they actually did it? I just don't think it'll work this time.
No.
And it just turns the Tories into a one-man Boris circus, right? Yeah. Where Boris the populist is going to be out-populisted, whatever the word is, by Farage. Yeah. And I just... it's a blasphemy.
And that's fundamental, right? It's like parties have got to distinguish themselves when it's such a crammed, race right now. You've got multiple parties who are all struggling for air, struggling to get noticed. Farage stands out right now because he's Farage and because he is very good and treated a little bit like a pundit by the networks and everything else, and by the BBC and ITV and everyone else. But everyone else needs to distinguish themselves from them. And right now, the Tories are not. They are just like Reform Light. Labour are, as we said the other day, Labour right now are mimicking a little too much. And the LibDems are standing out more certainly from Reform, but they're struggling to get the actual attention, which is always happens, right?
Even at the local elections, where we got an absolutely mega result, where we started to say that, got social media gobs basically saying, "Are you guys not watching its Reform?" It's like it was us as well, but you just actually made a really, really valid observation, which I think pivots neatly into kind of where we're going with this, which is the idea of Farage still being treated as a commentator rather than as a political leader. Yeah. It's like he's the guy who supposedly is now I think he is the favourite to be the next prime minister after the next election. But you're right, they act like he's just a political commentator, an activist, a rent-a-quote, rather than actually the guy who's then supposed to be going and fixing things. Why is that?
I think part of it goes back to his long career as a politician has generally been as the man on the outside lobbing things in, right? He was effectively a fun irrelevance for a long time because people did not care about our relationship with the EU. We were all right. We were, it's all right, yeah, whatever. We just kind of got on with our lives. There were more pressing issues. But over time, he made it the number one issue. And everyone has struggled to almost treat him or turn or pivot into that idea that he is not a man on the outside. It's a little bit like Trump, right? Trump continually, even to this day, he tries to play this part of not being a part of the establishment, of being, the man to drain the swamp and all that kind of stuff. When it effectively is at the centre of it, of course he's a part of the establishment, and Farage is the same. And the British media, this is where they are. And I'm stealing slightly because I did. I've definitely heard this from other commentators in the last few weeks as well. He needs to be held to account. If he wants to be prime minister of the country, Keir Starmer, say what you want about him. For several years, he was auditioning to be prime minister, and he was constantly being put under pressure and questioned. His party was being questioned. It's one of the reasons why they were very light on policy, right? Because they didn't want to come under heavy scrutiny. But Farage isn't getting any scrutiny.
No,
and the main piece, the thing that annoys me the most, is that he is the man who spent his entire life effectively arguing about our relationship with the EU, fighting against the EU, saying we have to come out of the EU, and he finally got his way. And yet he has somehow avoided all blame for what's happened, which was the other reason why I was so annoyed when he started going on about betrayal yesterday, but from Starmer, because it's like, wait a minute, it's like the reason things are so bad right now post Brexit is because you did this. But he's not being. No one's saying that to him in the media. No one's getting him on an interview and saying, "Hold on a minute, Nigel. Well, wasn't this your idea in the first place?"
Isn't this though the reality of it, which is he has really caught the zeitgeist. He is we absolutely have got to do some significant changes to the country. Okay, so he's leading on migration because that's something that he sees as being an obvious wedge issue to try and drive into people, but actually it's broader than that. And when you look at reform, they do actually have some ideas, even if it's what I lovingly describe as crayon policies. Get a sheet of paper and a red crayon and a small child and get them to draw you a picture. That's the reform manifesto. There's no substance or how or any of it behind it, as we're now going to start seeing with these councils. But they are saying what people think in terms of that's broken, this isn't working, this is tatty, what are we doing about it? And they're saying, hey, we've got some ideas. And maybe that's his point of difference. And it's just this, we really have to dig into it. Hopefully, in a few days' time when we do the next one, there hasn't been another 704 news stories. And we just go straight into it. But people really want change. And I think that unless parties can find a way of offering that in an accessible way, then they're going to lose. We talk about change elections, or let's not. Some elections are, we've got a government, it's doing reasonably well, let's not rock the boat, let's not let's not put amateurs into office. Other elections are, they've got to go, this is awful. Or 2019 is a prime example, we've got massive change, we need to get on with it. This next election, regardless of what happens with the dynamics of different party leaders, is going to be the ultimate in change elections, because I think people are broadly unhappy with the way that the country is on quite a basic level.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have mentioned, obviously you've mentioned change a lot on the last few podcasts, and that's because ultimately that's what this is all about, right? People are desperate for change, and there's a number of I'm finding myself using more extreme language when we talk about this, and again, think words like desperate. That is genuinely where we are right now. People are desperate for something, for someone to give them a little bit of hope. And again, Nigel Farage offers zero hope, but he offers change. And change
offers, but it's also that he actually acknowledges that people are desperate.
Yeah, it's that it's that old adage of the first step in solving a problem is admitting that there is one, and everybody. I mean, look, Keir Starmer talks about things being broken, but it's very light. It's like things are broken because of the Tories, not things are broken because we have systematic problems within our country that go back even further than the Tories and need to be fixed.
Look, there's been different colours of government. There's been different skill sets in governments, but broadly, the only question is, we've been on a downward slope, and when did it start? And I think different people will talk about different things, but I think there's been practically everybody can recognise that things are getting significantly worse. The national debt has exploded, and no, it's not just COVID. It was going up anyway because the Tories were just burning cash. We've got a productivity gap where British workers are less productive for the hours worked as an average versus other nations. We've definitely got a declining birth rate, and therefore, as the cost of everything goes shooting up, you need more people working to actually try and pay for stuff, and we're not doing it. So migration, the positive case of migration is that you need it not just to fill the jobs that we don't seem to be able to fill with people, but actually the people who are then working and then paying for the pensions and the elderly care and all of the other things that we say are important that we can't afford to do otherwise. But clearly we've gone too far. I mean, we've ended up with far more migrants coming in over the last 5 years, and we built houses as an example. But we can't build houses because we don't have the skilled workforce, which is why we need the migrants to come in and build them. So surely the obvious we need change and we need to do something about migration thing to tie them together is, okay, we need to train doctors, nurses, care workers, builders, electricians, plumbers, etc. And that's going to take some investment now, and it's going to take a few years to get on with it. So we still need migrants while they're here, but we are then going to start moving into a future where we're able to do more of these things ourselves. So there's at least a direction of travel. I don't think people expect a magic wand to be waved and everything to be fixed. They're just like a plan.
Yeah, exactly. A plan, and back to that piece of a grown-up conversation. I think politicians and pundits and everything else, they do belittle the electorate a lot.
Yes.
It's like a lot of that. I mean, and that's gone on for a long time, and we saw it with Brexit. You're stupid if you voted for this or whatever. Yeah. It's so common. And the truth is, I think a true grown-up conversation about immigration, the pros and cons, if somebody came out and did that, again, I'm looking at Keir Starmer right now, if he was to come out and have that grown-up conversation and say, hey, look, yes, there's been too many people who have ultimately come into the country, and that's put a strain on services, but ultimately we do need people to help us build houses, fix schools and everything, all of those kinds of things, and then talk about how financially, throughout history, migration has been a net positive for the country. It's all about how the money is then spent.
I don't think
it's not been spent appropriately.
He's not capable. Kemi definitely not capable. Ed Davey shows plenty of signs of being, Mr. Touchy-feely connection with at least parts of the electorate, so maybe he can have a go. But I think there's a large chunk of people who can't be reached and don't want to be reached. But I get very, very annoyed when people describe reform voters in the same negative ways you were just talking about with Brexit voters and all the rest of it. Because, it's not, people are not stupid, they're not thick, and they're not making this stuff up. Their lives really are a struggle.
It's one of the most frustrating things. I mean, it's like when we go back to talking about, a lot of people aren't into politics. Not being into politics doesn't mean they're stupid. It doesn't mean that they're dumb or anything like that. It just means that they got other things going on in their lives, and unfortunately, the politicians don't help, because if they just see a bunch of politicians all saying the same thing or mimicking one another and not standing for something and not showing the principles that they want to see, then they're just going to turn off.
And the thing is, right, and let's wrap this up by taking quite a lot of steps back and then pointing into what we really need to get into talking about on the next one, which is here's the big picture of it, right? That Farage gets, and certainly Labour and Tories aren't showing any signs that they're willing to accept this, which is there are millions of people in this country who are trapped and feel trapped, and many of them are working. So you've got the people who can't afford to get a job because the work that's available, doesn't pay the bills, and will mean that you've got horrible punitive edge tax rates on a number of things. And then you've got people who are working and it doesn't matter how hard they work, they can't pay their bills because the cost of living has gone absolutely crazy. And unless we're actually able to do something about the basic fundamentals of work is supposed to make you better off, until we actually address that, there's always going to be the Pied Piper populist agitator like Farage basically saying, it's their fault. Well, it isn't. It's not the fault of immigrants. It's the fault of we've got a system where, real wages are lower than real bills. Well, let's go and do something about it.
Absolutely. And look, it's that, maybe that is the topic, or certainly a big part of the topic of the next one. It's the contract between a democracy and, the establishment and its people.
Yes.
Which is that if you do a hard day's work, you should have enough money to put a roof over you and your family's heads, have enough food on the table, and also have a little bit of money left over so you can actually enjoy life. Because otherwise, what is the point of any of it, right?
And if you do want to enjoy life and you really want to get the most out of it, make sure you've liked and subscribed and shared the video so that you can get into other people to come and enjoy our version of life as well.
What a pro. What a pro you are. You can see you've done this before.
A few times. I think we should wrap it up because as usual, we've gone over our own time limits. But I think we're going to just do that every time.
Yeah, it's it's the right thing to do.
It is. So we're for everyone who missed it last time, we're planning on doing these twice a week. Is the intention at least. So, but you probably do need to hit the bell icon to make sure that you know when these are coming out, because even we don't necessarily know because we're both busy. But I think we'll wrap it up there.
Awesome. Thank you as always, everyone.
And thank you for talking through all of that. And we'll see you back here very soon on Emergency Podcast.
Cool. See you in a few days.